Dr. Terry spent most of her career in the intelligence community. She holds a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. She not only worked in the intelligence community, she was a director on the National Security Council for Korea. She was the senior intelligence officer in the National Intelligence Council. She is a fellow at the Weatherhead Center for Asia at Columbia University, a fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. And all of you have seen her nonstop on TV for the last several days. She came into London on a red-eye flight and is hearty enough of life that she is going to give us an education on this mad circus we have been seeing in the last few days. Won't you please give us a sense of what you think happened in Singapore and what you think it means?
Is this on? Okay. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here to see also a different crowd than the Washington crowd that I'm so familiar with the same faces, so it's really nice to see different faces. Thank you for coming. I don't have any answers. I only have questions. So I hope to sort of have a discussion with you guys, just going back and forth, because I really don't have any answers. But just before I talk about the summit, one of the key questions, just talk pre-summit a little bit. One of the key questions that I was dealing with is this question of this competing narrative that kept coming up about Kim Jongun. Every time we say, all the naysayers saying he's not going to really denuclearize, and you heard this, like we have a different definition of denuclearization. North Korea has one definition, US has another, and is Kim Jongun going to be any different? I've been going to South Korea, and many different people, this is like particularly in South Korea, when I went to meeting with Foreign Ministry or Ministry of Unification, the Blue House, or Intelligence Service, their assessment is now that Kim Jongun is different. Well, at least this is competing narrative that's been told to me, that Kim Jongun is different than his father, than his grandfather. That he's, and when pressed for evidence of this, of course there's no real evidence, but except you hear this narrative about, well, because he's a young leader, because he's educated in the West, because he's a young leader who has to rule North Korea for the next 40 to 50 years, not like his father, because he's educated in the West, because he skied in the Swiss Alps and swam in the French Riviera, somehow, and because he genuinely has affection for some of the Western things. He has brought Western chef to North Korea to make cheese and some Western food. And it is true that when he came into power, he did all this, like he was busy building all these modern trappings of what looks like a modern state, right? He was busy building a ski resort and horseback riding club to a dolphinarium and aquarium and pizza parlors and tall buildings and so on. That the argument goes now that after spending 7 years really trying to complete the nuclear program, some 90 ballistic missile tests, right? That's double the number that his father and grandfather tested combined. 4 out of 6 nuclear tests, 3 ICBM tests last year, and then hydrogen bomb tests. Now that he's ready to really take North Korea into a different direction, that we need to give him a chance. I really heard this narrative over and over. So obviously, coming from intelligence background, having followed North Korean issue really for many years, obviously I was very, very skeptical, but I was hoping, some small hope that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is that chance, because maybe he is different. Because to be honest, intelligence community does not know a whole lot about Kim Jongun. Now, I'm sure because of the recent activities, it's actually one positive is that this is intelligence boom. But, for 7 years until recently, the only person he had dealt with was Dennis Rodman. And even if you've debriefed Dennis Rodman, I mean, we don't know a whole lot, right? When Kim Jong-un first came into power, I still remember, even CIA, we just had that one photo of 11-year-old photo of Kim Jong-un, the black and white photo, the New York Times ran. This was really pathetic, but it's true. Our intelligence was very, very poor. So because of that, and because there was not a whole lot of intelligence on Kim Jong-un and his intention, what he's like, and because all the decisions are now truly being made by that one person, I thought, perhaps that because of our, we shouldn't be so overconfident in thinking that Kim Jong-un is never ready to do this. Maybe he is ready to sort of turn the page. So leading up to this summit, even though I had lower expectation, just particularly because after multiple visits by Pompeo to North Korea, and he came back, it seemed like North Korea, I still have not seen anywhere leading up to the summit them defining denuclearization the way we define it. Right? They have never said denuclearization in a complete, verifiable, irreversible thing. They keep insisting on denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula if the regime security is guaranteed, if the US hostile policy ends, all of that, which of course you know what all that means. That means end of US-South Korea alliance commitment, end of US troop presence in South Korea, end of the extended nuclear umbrella that we have over South Korea and Japan. They have not changed, like even the Panmunjom declaration after Kim Jong-un met with Moon Jae-in, whatever, they came up with that statement of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and there was just very general phrase. So I was concerned leading up to this summit that we still have not agreed upon definition on denuclearization, that this gap is still very wide. Still, I couldn't have imagined that after Secretary Pompeo went to North Korea twice, after we hosted North Korean official Kim Yong-chul, after he came to the White House, and after we canceled and North Korea came up with their last statement 7 hours later and then we reinstated, I couldn't have imagined that we would have agreed to a summit, that President Trump would have gone to Singapore with what was produced. So even with very low expectation, I was floored by the joint statement that came out. Because I truly thought, so from the US side, just because Pompeo and Secretary Mattis and other folks who talked about this still talked about complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear program over and over. So I thought there had to be some sort of understanding that North Korea had to give more. And then on the North Korean side, I thought Kim Jong-un just tactically speaking, and this is what I was trying to talk to you a little bit about earlier, he had to provide a little bit more than what he provided. Just to really quiet down this kind of skeptics like me, to sort of say, to continue that narrative that I just explained earlier when I spoke about Kim Jong-un somehow being different, now he's ready for a change. Just to continue that narrative, because it makes sense from North Korean perspective to push that path, even to buy time, which is I think North Korea's true goal, even if their goal is to raid out the Trump administration, they need to give something up front and then wait this out and then drag this out as long as possible. It just makes sense. So I thought they would have to do it, to give a little more. So I was very surprised by the stinginess also by Kim Jong-un of how little he gave. Because that statement, that 4 points, which is just a bunch of verbiage that had said nothing, the third point, which is the only sentence, says when North Korea will work towards. Well, I work towards a lot of things that I want to do that I cannot accomplish. And that's so much less than even 2005 statement, right? When they agreed to abandon their nuclear program. And this working towards language goes back to 1992 joint North Korea-South Korea declaration. This is stuff we've heard before, and less than what we got from North Korea. So after all of this, that's what we got. That one sentence. They will work towards. And then, fine, if we're going to get absolutely nothing, then we should also give nothing, right? They were just truly meet and greet. And we should have known because President Trump really lowered the expectation after really raising the bar earlier. Remember the first time he was going to meet with Kim Jong-un and somehow walk away with complete denuclearization of North Korea. But he has then lowered the bar to now meet and greet, and he's going to be phased approach. Several meetings it's going to take. So I'm still trying to process as what happened. Now, if you get that much, which is really less than nothing, I mean, it was really nothing, then why are we stopping joint exercises? Why are we putting anything on the table for North Korea? So that's very concerning to me, and particularly because it was not coordinated with our allies. We did not talk about this, we didn't coordinate this language with South Korea. And then also concerning to me is that separately he also still talks about troop presence and so on. So I'm glad that at least the catastrophic thing didn't happen, which was what I was really worried about, is President Trump putting something like peace treaty on the table. At least it's something about working towards peace or some very general language, and at least we didn't put that on the table. But still, I feel like we gave something away in return for nothing. Now, North Korea is in a great position today, and I think I have to give it to Kim Jongun. I have underestimated him. After last year of all this tests, 90 tests and so on, I really thought he was going to do more. I thought he was going to continue with the provocation. I thought he was going to go all the way. That's why I was worried about North Korea conducting a possible atmospheric nuclear test or going further to prove their reentry capability and so on. But he knew just when to stop. He didn't go there. He just stopped at the 90-95%, right there. He didn't need to prove it. All of a sudden, he declares from January 1 New Year's editorial address now that they have completed the program, which was a very smart move, instead of pushing it, because remember, this is all in the midst of all our talk of bloody nose and preventive strike, talking about that. So that was really smart move. And then it turns to symmetry and diplomacy, starting with sending North Korea delegation or athletes to South Korean Olympics. And look what they have achieved. Look what Kim Jong-un was able to achieve in the since January. He has met with Xi Jinping twice. He had met with South Korean President Moon Jae-in a couple of times. He has hosted Russian foreign minister. He just met with the Prime Minister of Singapore. He met with the US president. Right? He had sit down, he had a meeting with US president that his father and his grandfather, they tried. They were not able to accomplish this, but he accomplished something like this. Now, he's going to, after this, I'm sure he's going to host Xi Jinping. He's going to meet with Putin. He might even meet with Abe. He has completely normalized himself. He now looks like a legitimate ruler of a normal, legitimate country. He met with President Trump. They really pursued this equal optics, and we gave it to them, even lining up the American flag with the North Korean flag. We gave them all of this. And President Trump praising Kim Jong-un. It's an honor to meet with the #1 human rights violator on the planet. Somebody that United Nations Commission of Inquiry in the 400-page report says he's the man who personally named him as a man who commits crime against humanity. He said he brought up human rights issue. That's really unclear. It's not anywhere in the part of the joint statement. After multiple visits by Prime Minister Abe, I'm not sure how much he talked about the abduction issue. Yeah, so truly, Kim Jong-un comes out away from this with really elevated standing. He looks, even internationally, it was remarkable to me to watch the footage unfold. It's also just Korean American. My paternal grandparents came from North Korea. From divided families. It's just really remarkable to me to watch Kim Jong-un running around Singapore, taking selfies, treated like a rock star. Truly, it's like people were treating him like a rock star. So now, going forward, I think already he has gained so much because political will to implement sanctions is already gone. It's really gone. After Xi Jinping met with Kim Jong-un twice, we're already getting reports, right? We are hearing reports about sanctions loosening on the ground level. We are hearing reports about North Korea's seafood showing up in the Chinese side. We've been hearing about ship-to-ship transfer of fuel. The Japanese reporting, you've seen that. I think the political will to go back to maximum pressure will be gone from China, from Russia, even South Korea too. Even though South Korea might not violate United Nations Security Council resolutions on sanctions, they're going to look for ways to continually improve, right, inter-Korea projects and so on. So without having done a thing, with just that sentence of just committing work towards denuclearization, now they have legitimized real rule. They got the international prestige they're looking for. They have now loosened that whole implementation of sanctions. Even if we keep saying we're not going to lessen sanctions, but they're already getting what they want on the sanctions front. It's going to be hard for the United States to go back to preventive strike talk. How can we? We're going to look like completely crazy people, right? How can we go back to that when North Korea is totally looking normal? And I don't believe that North Korea is going to go back. Even if things fall apart with the United States, they're not going to go back to testing. I personally believe that Kim Jong-un is now very, very smart about this. He's not going to go back to nuclear missile testing. They say they are done with the program. India and Pakistan tested 6 times. They're done. That's enough for them. They don't have to do it until way down the road. So they've already gained tremendously. So in this, if there's this is a game, I mean, this 1-0, North Korea, US 0. So next few steps, I think we'll have to see what will happen. I think just continuing with this momentum is important. In terms of trying to get something out of North Korea, we'll see, because Pompeo is supposed to go to North Korea and meet with Kim Jong-chul again, and I'm sure at the ground level, Sung Kim, and he will meet his counterpart and will continue this discussion. But the next step will be to show that we're really going somewhere. We must get full declaration from North Korea on all their inventory of nuclear weapons and fissile material and facilities. We got to get full, and then an exact timeline. But what I truly believe is North Korea's game plan, and I'll just conclude with this. North Korea's game plan is to, even if they agree to something and they dismantle some facility, I don't know exactly what Trump was talking about in terms of which facility they're supposed to dismantle. That's kind of confusing. But even if they do dismantle a facility or do something to show that they are going in this direction, I don't believe we're going to get there. I personally don't believe we're going to get to complete verifiable, irreversible dismantlement thing. And even if there is some sort of agreement, which we don't right now, but even if we get some sort of agreement, let's say in 6 months or so on, I think their plan is to drag this out. And even Trump himself said verification is going to take a long time. And you don't know if a deal is successful or not until way down the road, right? Even 1994 Agreed Framework, we thought was fairly successful agreement. Until 2002, when all of it fell apart, and we found out that North Korea has been cheating on that program by pursuing uranium enrichment program. So my point is, I'm very disappointed of what came out. I don't see optimistic future just based on this particular meeting. And even if we get something out of North Korea, I think their plan is to sort of drag this out as long as possible until this administration leaves, and 5 years down the road, they get to their true goal, and which already they partially achieved, which is international acceptance, international community's acceptance of North Korea as a nuclear weapons state.
That was a virtuoso performance, my friend. Thank you. Can I ask you to say a little bit more about two particular aspects?
Yeah.
One, what do you assess North Korea's agenda is for Korean unification? Do they have ambitions in that regard? And then second, how do you think the Japanese are going to react to what took place in Singapore?
So on unification, we've been hearing about this, right? That they do have unification goal in mind, long term. Not that necessarily they will be able to achieve it, but that they cannot really give up this goal in the long run just because of the existence of just a freer, richer South Korean state pose existential threat for North Korea, that they have to think about unification on its own terms. I'm not sure how realistic that goal is, but that goal is it's not gone away. So the problem with North Korea having this nuclear weapons program, and at least this was the rationale also by the Trump administration when they were thinking about preventive strike. Their rationale was that its nuclear weapons for North Korea was not only for defensive purposes, it's not only for deterrence, as they say it is, that we were worried that it was also for, even the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, said nuclear weapons for North Korea are for deterrence, prestige, and coercive diplomacy, right? With that, you threaten if you can get to, and you have completed nuclear weapons program, you can threaten the United States, mainland, and under this U.S. first policy, we're not going to sacrifice San Francisco or Seattle force whole. And then once their goal is, with that, they are able to exercise coercive diplomacy, eventually concluding a peace treaty, eventually getting U.S. forces out of South Korea, and then the long plan is somehow be able to affect, get unification on their own terms way into the future. But again, I don't, how realistic that goal is. I think it's just increasingly getting more unrealistic, and I think North Koreans understand this, but they have not completely abandoned it as a goal. In terms of Japan question, I'm sure Japan is, exceedingly unhappy. Even the Prime Minister Abe has put in a good face. I mean, they're not going to be vocal about this. But this is this was their concern. This is why they came. Prime Minister Abe met with President Trump multiple times. It was a strategic decision for Prime Minister Abe to be one of the last person to talk to President Trump. In fact, I gave that advice because President Trump seems to continually shift. So I think it's really important to be one of the last person to be whispering in his ear. Still, I'm not sure how much President Trump really took on that. I mean, maybe he addressed the abduction issue a little bit. I don't know. But I think Japan's concern is really valid, particularly because now that President Trump is talking about just the end of the joint exercises and continually talking about our troop presence in South Korea. So what does that mean later for Japan? I do think they have every right to be worried, although they're not going to be vocal about it.
Superb. I know we probably have an avalanche of questions. May I ask you to, I will acknowledge you, wait for a microphone to get there, and then please give us your name and your affiliation. Nigel, you get the first shot.
Yeah, thanks very much for a very stimulating presentation. Nigel Inkster, I'm Senior Advisor here at IISS. What do you think South Korea and Moon Jae-in are getting out of this? I ask this because in the run-up to the actual summit in Singapore, we've seen South Korea hit by a kind of crescendo of cyber attacks. You know, it's a really, very significant increase in volume. How does South Korea see this playing out, and what does it think it's got, if anything, from this summit, particularly in the light of your observations about the North's long-term thinking on the subject of reunification?
So first, I think the Moon Jae-in government and South Korea as a whole is a different issue. So South Korea is still very divided. So, I want to talk about the South Korean society a little bit later. For just the Moon Jae-in administration, I think they're conflicted. They were really driving this, right? I think the whole thing about preventive strike, the bloody nose, that freaked out the South Koreans more than anybody, more than North Koreans, more than anybody else. I think South Koreans were really paranoid. They were not really paranoid because they were rightfully concerned. So they really tried to they're the one who drove this. And I talked to multiple South Korean officials, and they think as long as we can keep on going and move the ball forward, they're okay with this. Although I do think they are now concerned about this, what came out with this end of Trump just announcing end of joint exercises without consulting President Moon. So I think they're still conflicted, Moon Jae-in government, because you want to, it's not, their worst nightmare was President Trump and Kim Jongun having some sort of fiasco of a meeting and everything blowing up. That didn't happen. And we're going to continue with this engagement, dialogue, negotiation process. So I think they're relieved about that. Yet now they have to be concerned about what does this mean about the troop presence and for the larger. And then they have to also contend with the criticism that's coming out of not only the conservatives, there's a lot of South Korean society, even though they're critical of US in many ways, they still value alliance relationship. They still value true presence in South Korea. They understand this. So I think that South Korean government has to really manage this somehow. So I think they're just sort of watching, wait and watch mode, but I think they're genuinely conflicted, having really, they're the one who just really drove this. And so it's like what I said earlier, like you have to be careful for what you wish for. So, I think, but they will continue to be engaged with North Korea. When Trump canceled the meeting with Kim Jong-un the first time he said there's going to be no more summit, one of the first things Moon Jae-in did was call Kim Jong-un right away. And they now have, and then met with Kim Jong-un for the second time, just spontaneous meeting. So they have that dialogue too. So, I think they will just sort of watch and see what continues to unfold. But I think they're a little bit conflicted.
Jonathan, you are up next. Before I get you a microphone, I should have said, before we bring the BBC into this, that we are on the record and you should feel free to quote Dr. Terry.
Yes, thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating presentation. Made it interesting again after the marathon yesterday. But Jonathan Marcus from the BBC. Following on from your comments about Japan, I mean, goodness knows, perhaps one term of Mr. Trump raises enough problems, but potentially 2 terms of him. In what do you see America's allies, what sort of accommodations will they be making in the medium term in the region? I mean, do you see more people, more countries thinking about making an accommodation with China, perhaps more on Beijing's terms, because they can no longer perhaps rely on the security guarantees offered by the United States?
Well, I don't see Japan necessarily siding with China, but Japan, I think, will just try to, Japanese officials also, I think, pretty much admitted that they have to, if they have to do their own thing, they will. I mean, I don't think we can fault our allies for that, particularly when more and more what we see coming out of the Trump administration is that I don't know how committed how much he values allies, our alliance commitments. Even when President Trump said, we're going to stop joint exercises, I mean, why do you say? Because they're so expensive. I mean, there's a million different ways to say we're going to stop joint exercises. But he used, he said these are war. First of all, as I mentioned to you, he first of all used North Korea's way of describing it. War games, these are provocative war games that are too expensive. It's like, what? No, they were defensive exercises, training because of the North Korean threat. But given this, in light of what we're trying to do with North Korea, in this environment, we're going to suspend joint exercises for now. No, he didn't say that. He said these are war games, it's provocative, they're too expensive. So already Koreans are reacting to that, saying, what? This is how you see our exercises. So I think this is a serious problem. But I'm not sure about, particularly for Japan, I think Japan is just going to go on its own way more and more, or not so vocally, but I think they will be prepared to do so, even perhaps South Korea, particularly if this lasts more than a couple of years.
Before I go to James Hackett, our next questioner, I want to tell you that he is the editor of this outstanding dossier that the IISS has just produced on the conventional military balance on the Korean Peninsula. There are copies of it on the table by the door. I would encourage, in particular, our journalist friends and colleagues, that if you want to be accurate on the data you are reporting about these things about the conventional balance on the Korean Peninsula, the Defense and Military Analysis team here at the IISS has got you covered. James.
Kari, thanks for the advert. And Sumi, thanks very much for a really insightful presentation. I want to ask about the reaction of the KPA to all this, the Korean People's Army, the North Korean Armed Forces. What do you think that after this, if assuming missile tests and nuclear tests have stopped, what do you think that Kim will now give them, and what might they demand? After all, for years they've been used to a military-first policy. Do you think that he will push resources towards something like conventional force modernization, or do you think for the KPA that the halt in these exercises is enough now to satisfy them?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's in KPA, I don't quite buy this line that there's a bunch of real hardliners in KPA that Kim Jongun has to really somehow deal with. He purged like 300 people, and there were also recent purges. I think they will get in line with Kim Jongun. And this, I don't think this pause in nuclear missile testing, which I say, well, there's this pause, it's not a permanent thing necessarily. It's for a couple, this is what I'm saying, buying time. And they can still work on the nuclear capability, even if they don't do testing. In the conventional, there's other things that they can continue to do. So I don't necessarily, I'm not sure if there's going to be any kind of revolt or great dissatisfaction coming out of the KPA. I think Kim Jong-un has done quite good job purging everybody who can pose any kind of threat to him. And they were line up with what he's, what he said, whatever his next move is. But again, it's not like they're going to dismantle a conventional army. They're going to do anything different. We just had that one. This is a long way to go. This is just one statement out of North Korea somehow working towards denuclearization. This is years. There's no need for any changes to occur in North Korea in terms of KPA capability or anything else, really.
Desmond Bone, I'm a member here. Too bad that the Nobel Prize looks as though it's going to have to be deferred for a bit. The question that I'd like to ask you is about the role of China, and particularly President Xi. I mean, there was a Chinese airplane that delivered Kim Jongun to the summit, but a lot of the interests that the North Koreans have actually coincide with Chinese interests. I mean, like booting the US out of South Korea, reducing that presence, and reducing, as it were, the kind of confidence in American pledges, security pledges. So, I mean, I just wondered whether you'd kind of comment on the extent to which China and President Xi, really have been operating in a coordinated way to arrive at the place that they are at the moment.
I think so. I think clearly there was some coordination. Kim Jong-un met with President Xi Jinping twice, as you know. And the second time that Kim Jong-un met with President Xi, then he came back and he talked about, all of a sudden he had problem with joint exercises, which a couple of months prior, he told Moon Jae-in, South Korean president, that he was actually okay with joint exercises. So what I was suspecting from that is that perhaps that was China's ask to Kim, and Kim asked, and he got delivered. So after the summit, this summit is successful not only for North Korea for all the reasons that I mentioned, but it's truly a very successful outcome for China. This is what China wanted. This is the whole freeze for freeze proposal that they've been talking about for a whole year, or even previous to that. So this is exactly the outcome that China wanted. China also wants to always be able to influence North Korea. And what's greater influence if Kim Jong-un felt safe enough to fly a Chinese airplane to go get to Singapore? That shows you their close relationship still. I'm not saying that China's and North Korea's relationship is so close that we did evolve over the years from the time that Mao sent his own son to the Korean War, and actually he died in the Korean War, right? There was a real blood alliance in that relationship. It has obviously evolved. I don't know if necessarily that there's such a close bond, but there's still no doubt that China's priority is still to be able to have a maximum influence over North Korea, and I think they still do. And those two meetings, I think, indicate that. And the outcome of the summit is truly a win for China, in addition to North Korea.
Which makes it an excellent time to go to our Chinese colleague.
Hi, Shao from Chinese Embassy. Just got a question to follow up on the Chinese statement, one concerning the peace regime to be formulated. What's your assessment? What kind of peace regime will be, like a peace treaty, or like four-party talks or six-party talks, or how do you think will the things evolve in that regard?
I think they intentionally left it vague. So it could be any of that. I am actually concerned myself about peace treaty. I've always been concerned about prematurely concluding a peace treaty for the United States, just because no matter what people say, I do think while that sounds good in theory and it's truly historic and it sounds good because it does formally end the Korean War, I do think that it undermines the rationale for US troop presence in South Korea. I do think it undermines our alliance commitment, just because eventually, even if that doesn't come up, the troop presence and so on, once you conclude a peace treaty and you really end the war, I think naturally the question will come up sooner or later. Why do we need to have our troops in South Korea if there's no war and North Korea is no longer a threat and so on? But I think at this juncture, at least the US didn't go there. They didn't talk about peace treaty. They just called it peace regime, intentionally leaving it vague. So I think it could unfold in just a number of different ways, as you mentioned. So I don't think it's decided right now. It depends on how things progress with North Korea.
The director of the IISS, Dr. John Chipman.
Thank you very much. Splendid talk. I thought you were rather generous in scoring the result of the summit, DPRK 1, US 0. It felt to me more like DPRK 5, US 0. So I guess my question is, how could Kim Jong-un blow his lead? You described him as having played quite a blinder up until now, and judging exactly the level of brinkmanship that might be tolerated by a then pugnacious White House. But how could he blow his lead? What mistake could he make which would make the US do something which, under this administration, it's done in the past, which is do another U-turn?
That the mistake would be if they return to provocation because they get upset, right? For example, number of things can happen here. Already people are walking back this troop, the joint exercises thing. If an administration official or somebody says something very negative, or that Kim Jong-un is also famously thin-skinned. He cares very much about what other people say. So there's something that's very, that enrages him. This is exactly why North Koreans came up with the first two statements, criticizing Vice President Pence and Bolton, talking about Libya and everything else, because they were so upset by them. So then if North Korea ever returns to provocation, I think they will give us a reason to go back to it. As long as they don't, and I'm banking on the fact that they don't, they're not going to blow this lead. How are they going to blow it? It's only if they return to provocation. That almost will be a gift for the people who wants to do, if this is not going to work out. They're not going to blow this lead. I think they're going to stay put, just continue all the symmetry and diplomacy, continue on with everybody else. Already, then they're way ahead. I think it's really hard for the United States to get back to the maximum pressure.
Joe, way in the back.
Thank you. Joseph Dempsey, Research Associate here at the Institute.
And I should say has had an outstanding Twitter game over the last 4 or 5 days, pushing out maps that the DMAP folks have been making and giving a sense of where testing has been.
Thank you, Corey, for my extra followers. Just following off my colleague James's question, my question's really focused on the testing once again. So on the nuclear device testing, I'm with you. I agree they've demonstrated 6 nuclear tests, including what we believe is a thermonuclear test. The rationale for testing more is very limited. We've seen that of the willingness to close a nuclear site. But I just wondered what your take is on where they may go with this further. So moving from a rogue state towards a legitimate nuclear power, in their eyes at least, and maybe in the world's eyes. So the chances are, could we see a move towards comprehensive test ban treaty? Could we see a signage of the non-proliferation treaty as well? Second point on the missile testing. Yes, they have demonstrated a myriad of new systems over the last 2 years, as we've seen, including the first ICBM tests. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I said there was a few more tests in the line of the existing systems, and maybe even some of the new systems we've seen glimpses of. I wonder how much they've been cut short, though, because of the, where credit's due, maximum pressure approach. The possibility of a conventional strike, a bloody nose strike. Have they got to the level they wanted to, or were they, maybe 6 months away and they've started talking a bit earlier and coming to the table? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think they've achieved the full capability. I think there are a couple more technical hurdles that they needed to cross, and they didn't. But it really doesn't matter, I think, for their purposes. I think you were saying be already accepted as a legitimate nuclear power. I think they are. They are accepted as a nuclear weapons power. Huh? We've just done that. The Singapore meeting was a big coming out party for North Korea as one of the newest member of the nuclear state in the world. I mean, they've done that. So they don't really have to even go there as long as they call it is. And because we don't have definite, it's close enough for them to be, and they already have up to 16 nuclear warheads. I don't think they need to go there. This is why I don't think they will, because I always thought that their nuclear capability, they were never going to use it. I was never for once worried that they were going to actually use nuclear weapons or, attack the United States in any way, because clearly Kim Jongun has shown himself he's not insane. We talked about this, right? He's still a rational actor, and I believe that. And why would he do that when it will lead to truly the end of the regime and end of the state? So it was really just for, it's good enough for him to just say that they have it. It's close enough, and they'll sit on it until the right time comes about, which is a couple years, 5 years down the road, when they have to do more, and they really want to show it with a different administration. This is for the time being. This is over a several-year plan, I think.
I can't resist adding that that the president making such a big show of the summit in Singapore is an enormous boost to proliferation everywhere, because we have just demonstrated the value of crossing the nuclear threshold, and it's extraordinarily productive in a political sense and a security sense for the North Koreans. Next question here on the aisle.
Norman Dombey, University of Sussex. The question I was going to ask was actually asked by my predecessor, but in terms of conventional arms control, it seems to be quite useful to consider the obligations of a weapon state under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. These are obligations which the United States have, and these are the obligations which Korea, which Kim has just signed up to, namely to negotiate in good faith under Article 6, to negotiate in good faith on nuclear disarmament, or rather towards complete nuclear disarmament. And that is precisely what he has written. In terms of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which was mentioned just now, do you think that he will now sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty? Because it seems to me that it's a logical thing to do.
Well, right now there's no agreement of anything. We just have a joint statement that's a little bit aspirational. So perhaps when we get to a real agreement phase, that could be part of that. I always argue for that. And by the way, I'm also arguing for not only conventional, but chemical and biological weapons too, not just the nuclear weapons if we're doing a comprehensive agreement with North Korea. But I think it's really premature to even talk about this, because right now, all we have is those 4 points, and I'm not even sure, still, after the summit, if North Korea is on board, even for denuclearization as we define it. I have not seen the word verifiable, irreversible. There was no timeline. There was no declaration, no intent to even say, commitment to say we're going to give a full declaration. There is no verification. They didn't agree to any kind of verification regime. So they have not agreed to anything right now. So yeah, sure, for a larger agreement that we're going to have in North Korea, all of this should be part of it. I just think it's very, very premature. I would like to first see that we're even going into the direction of the denuclearizing North Korea the way U.S. defines it.
Vipin Narang from MIT pointed out a couple of days ago that that the North Koreans had shifted their language from talking about denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula to talking about denuclearization writ large. And he concluded from that that the North Koreans were actually trying to position themselves to say that they, like the United States, were committing to eventual denuclearization. Yeah. That is, that they were making this a lot bigger and saying, we'll do it when you do it. What's your take on that?
No, that's absolutely right. So it was two things: denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, if the region security is guaranteed, meaning the U.S.-South Korea commitment, and also going to the larger statement, larger, like global zero. Sure, sounds great. I mean, it's both of it, and that's been a long-standing thing that North Koreans have been saying. So it's not actually something new, but this is sort of what they say. Sure, we're committed to denuclearization. Even Kim Il-sung, going back to Kim Il-sung, said we're committed to denuclearization if all of this happens.
Next, right back there,
Very
in the burgundy
right?
tie.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Peter Asprey, member of the Institute. Can I ask you whether you think there is such a thing as a sort of a kind of anti-Trump groupthink developing around, which is characterized by its sort of lack of measured tone, that it's sort of a knee-jerk narrative which jumps to a point which is always the same point, which is that Trump is a rogue element and out of control, and whether this is this is dangerous.
Yes. And as an intelligence analyst and civil servant, and I'm truly registered independent, I worry about that. I truly worry about that. So and not only anti-Trump thing, I also worry about my own bias, being so skeptical of North Korea because of my own history of watching North Korea for many years, just because of when you just deal with North Korea, just in terms of, you get so disappointed for so many years, and you're so used to the cycle that you have this almost inherent bias in your assumption of dealing with North Korea. That's why I began this talk, even just telling you the competing narrative that I heard. Trying to say Kim Jongun might be a different person. A lot of these things, previous negotiations occurred under Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung. I buy that. That's fine, even though there was a Leap Day deal, and even though he spent 7 years doing 90 missile tests. Okay, I still buy that argument that he might be a different person, and I do. And I also leave the possibility open that Kim Jong-un would want a different North Korea. I'm sure he's tired of ruling a poor pariah backward state. He doesn't want to. I mean, he cares about international perception of himself, and just purely from self-interest perspective, I think he does want different North Korea. But that's why I say, so I want to leave that open, that possibility, but you cannot fairly look at that joint statement and what came out of that meeting. Just look at the 2005 statement. Just compare the language. You cannot say that it's anything new or that it's anything even remotely better. So for that 4 points, President Trump went all the way there and had this, because we did give something to North Korea. So that's all I'm saying. At this stage, perhaps this is a larger strategy on Kim Jong-un's part. I mentioned this to you earlier, that I'm trying to even say, maybe this is Kim Jong-un is willing to even put something on the table later, but he's really lowering the expectation now just as a negotiation ploy with the United States to sort of say, okay, it's not going to be that easy. This is going to, to maximize what he gets out of it, which is fair for North Korea, that this is just the rock bottom. But with this statement, you cannot conclude that this is a different North Korea. That's just an objective assessment.
Or that the president has achieved something
great,
unprecedented, and not paid a price in order to achieve it.
So just to add a little bit, the president also said the Iran deal was insane, worst deal ever. I'm not an Iran expert, but to me, I mean, still Iran decided to give up. It wasn't like 97% of its nuclear material. It did have pretty strict verification regime. So he set himself up for something that has to be better than that, right? Because it was an insane deal, worse than ever. So we'll see if he can achieve that from North Korea. He did set up a bar for us to objectively analyze. It's not about being anti-Trump or pro-Trump. We'll see if he can come up with a deal that is better, because it clearly has to be, right? And based on what came out from Singapore in those 4 statements, we're not anywhere near that. I'm leaving open possibility that I'm missing something here, that President Trump can conclude an amazing deal with North Korea, or that Kim Jong-un will truly transform North Korea into a different country, open up. Eventually, by the way, to transform the country, he would have to do a lot of things, right? Because if there's an agreement, if there's some sort of normalization with the United States, there's going to be other demands that comes like a floodgate, right? About what about human rights, even though it's not addressed right now. Because for verification to even begin, I mean, we have to have people in North Korea roaming around North Korea. There are a lot of sensitive sites. There are political prison camps. So we'll see if North Korea is truly ready to go into a different direction and President Trump can conclude this deal or not. I'm just talking about this summit and this summit result.
Hi, Dr. Terry. Thank you very much. Caitlin Vita from the Institute. What's your assessment as to Trump's patience with this potentially spiraling diplomatic efforts if they go on the way you were mentioning? Does he not need to clinch a deal or clinch a win at some point, or is the summit itself that just happened a win for Trump?
Well, I think he's trying to portray it as a win already, right? Because even before the joint statement came out, he said, "Wow, this is so much better than I expected." So that's why I thought, wow, okay, there's something. They concluded something. But because of this criticism, I think it's pretty widespread criticism now, I do think he has to get something more, and North Korea could give something more. And this, that's what for momentum to continue, North Korea would have to provide a full declaration of all the inventory. If not, it will fizzle out, and we'll see. They would probably, I do think North Korea has to give more. I think we cannot this can't be the end with that 1 page, 1.5 page paper. There are just too many people criticizing it, even though I think his reaction would be, okay, this is he's trying to spin it as a win, but I don't think anybody's really buying that. I've been out, I've been flying, so I've not been watching Fox News coverage, Sean Hannity and others, but I think he needs to get more out of North Korea. Otherwise, it will just absolutely fizzle out.
Next, Senator in the back.
Is it possible that the standard against which... Oh, I beg your pardon. Stephen Fiamma, member of the Institute. Is it possible that the standard against which we're measuring this summit is not really the standard that Trump himself has in mind? You're talking about North Korea changing direction, denuclearization, and so on. But based on his past statements over many, many years, isn't this really just possibly the beginning of a phased withdrawal of the U.S. from its commitment to South Korea? And that would be the goal that he actually has in mind. He's been pretty clear and disparaging about the U.S. security guarantee for Korea. And if in fact this leads to an ability of the U.S. to exit both the troop deployments as well as the security guarantee itself, isn't it possible that that is the game that he's trying to play? And therefore, this is merely the first step along that line, and he has no desire or expectation that he's going to denuclearize the North, regardless of what he says in public.
Wow. It's possible. I don't know. But you heard me say this. It is my fear that at least with the withdrawal of U.S. troops, that he doesn't see it as a big concession to North Korea, but that it is what he does want it. So he's willing to put that on the table for something. I don't think it's necessarily for nothing, but I do agree with you that he could potentially see it as not a concession, but something that's actually good. Because he, even as a candidate, talked about the need for the U.S. Why do we need to have U.S. troop presence in South Korea? And he continually talks about how expensive it is, and this is also a problem in terms of just burden sharing agreement with South Korea, right? Because he doesn't understand why we have to pay what we pay and so on. So I understand your question. I don't know the answer to it. It is my fear that he actually thinks U.S. troop presence is something that's not that valuable for the United States. Huh? Yeah, that's why he talked about putting out U.S. troops, or with the need for why we need to have U.S. troop presence in South Korea. He questioned that. Even as a candidate, he continues to do it. And I was upset that watching press conference, he again talked about U.S. troops in South Korea just voluntarily when North Korea has not done anything yet. This is why I do share your concern that somehow that he doesn't see this as something that's in U.S.'s interest and is looking for ways to pull U.S. troops out. I mean, I do agree with your concern.
So I can't resist the temptation to answer the challenge about U.S. troops in South Korea, though, which is that President Trump is is an outlier on this, and I think has been since at least the 1980s. He fundamentally doesn't believe that American security guarantees are in the United States' interest to provide. So instead of the position that every American government since at least 1945 has taken, which is that the United States is more able to shape international relations in America's interests by having a set of friendships with countries that share our values and providing security guarantees so that those countries make braver choices about their values and about their direction, South Korea being the best example, which we supported for security reasons, encouraged on a path of political change, and have become increasingly committed to because of that remarkable political change that South Koreans made possible for themselves. And that by having those regional commitments, it makes us more able to handle the big challenges like the rise of China. Next question, the gal in back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Terry. I'm Katie Whitting from the Australian High Commission. I would be interested in your views about what a good deal would look like, and what is it that North Korea could give that would look better from your perspective?
Well, I felt like he should have, at least even from the summit, I think he should have left with commitment from North Korea, saying we're committed to denuclearization, right? They said that, working towards, but committed to, and committed to giving a full declaration of all their nuclear weapons facilities, and agree to a timeline, and agree to a robust verification regime. So at least that's the agreement. Now, just getting to that agreement, I don't think agreement is actually the hard part, because we have agreements in the past. And what we had in the past was not a bad agreement. If you reread the joint statement, 2005, 2007 joint declaration, it's actually pretty strong. The problem always has been that it falls apart over implementation and verification. But we don't, right now, as of today, we don't even have that kind of agreement, right? So at least when we get to that agreement phase, we do need that, we need full declaration first, because we need to even, before we can even negotiate, we need to have an understanding of what they have, the whole inventory, and then agree on a timeline and robust regime verification regime. And of course, even if we have that also, verification is going to be very, very, very difficult. We don't know all the weapons, what they have, where they're hidden. There's a lot of overt but covert facilities. There's a lot of underground tunnels, a lot of sensitive places that they can put this stuff away. So I think the realistic expectation is that even if North Korea decides to give some element of nuclear program, it's not going to be complete. To think that they're going to get rid of all of their nuclear program, I think is very, very unrealistic. But we can make, that's a policy decision, that we decide to live with managing the crisis, and that we're okay if we get to 60% solution. But to think that we can get to 100% solution, I think that's unrealistic, to be honest.
So we are nearly out of time, and I am going to take two last questions. I'm going to take them together. First, the gentleman sitting on the aisle back there, and then the gentleman over here on the right.
Thank you. Adil Sultan from King's College. Is there a linkage with, to Trump's behavior with what happened at G7? Because he was kind of embarrassed, and probably he was kind of under pressure to bring out something positive from this summit. Because what we saw before the summit was that he was going to give us some kind of a strong message. He's going to stop the North Korean leadership. But what came out was a different thing. And secondly, almost there is a universal consensus that this is unrealistic. So what is the lifespan of this agreement? How long do we have that we go back to square one? Thank you.
Question. The last one's over here.
Sumi, thank you very much. Martin Woodhead from Equinor. A very brief question. I wonder if you could say whether or not you were reassured by the depth of the State Department negotiating bench, given all the talk about how the State Department had been so gutted under the former Secretary of State. Thank you.
The linkage between G7, I'm not, well, I understand you're thinking that because it was such a disaster that he needed a win, but he was going to look for a win anyway, regardless of what happened with G7 meeting. So I'm not sure there's a clear linkage there, and I do think that joint statement has been agreed before he even came to Singapore. This is something that I'm sure Ambassador Kim and everybody else worked out. So it was already there to be signed. Usually that's what happens. It's not something they came up with on the spot. Lifespan of the agreement, again, that's the policy decision. If knowing in advance that North Korea is probably not going to get there, but we're never going to admit that, right? We're not going to say, well, we know you can keep, we have to still ask for 100%, but just internally know that, or accept the fact that they probably will keep elements of their nuclear program, and can we be okay with that? If they feel like they need to have that as an insurance, they're not going to be able to, it's still better if there's an agreement, international agreement, because there's the whole world that's watching you, so it's better to still try to do it covertly, keep it, right? Because they can actually, it's not active. It's still better than them testing every day and doing all this, making progress overtly. So it's more of a policy decision of just sort of deciding, knowing that they probably will cheat, knowing that they will keep some, it's still worthwhile goal to have some sort of agreement. Even if it takes you 5 years or 7 years, it's still better than where we were. That's an argument that we can make, right? It's still better than talking about, military strike. It's better than where we were. So we just accept that because this is North Korea. We're never going to have an ideal fairy tale solution. State Department bench, I was glad to see Sung Kim being brought on a loan from the Philippines because he's a veteran negotiator. So I was relieved, although Ambassador Kim knows better than this statement. So I was relieved when he was working on it, but I'm concerned that this is all he could get from North Korea. But I'm happy he's on board. I'm still okay with the CIA colleagues, my former CIA colleagues. I know Andy Kim and others. They know North Korea pretty well. They're very, very clear-eyed about North Korea. These are people who's been working on North Korean issue for many, many years. But this is why I'm still surprised that this is all they could get out of North Korea.
So 2 things in closing, my friends. First, thank you for showing up today. Your intellectual engagement is what makes the IISS such a vital, vibrant place. Be sure to take your copy of the good work of our defense and military analysis team on your way out the door. And second, won't you join me in thanking the extraordinary Dr. Sue Mito?